Let's see. We're going to talk about this oikos concept right now, but not for very long, partly because I don't think it's controversial for anybody here in this room, but I do encourage you to look at these lessons when you have time to. There's so much more, there's a lot of more helpful things in these that you might find helpful if you choose to train some other people, okay? So go through the lessons page by page. In this particular one, we're just gonna take about 15 minutes with it so we can start practicing the Discovery Bible Study process. And I'm just gonna go ahead and begin with that. Oh yeah, let's wait for Doreen to come back. Somebody else can share with Doreen, but this is another, just one of the many things that are in the notes, that things like this that we skip over because of time. And this is just a tool. It's just an idea. It's another acronym. And it's a way, if you're out looking for people of peace, like on a specific day in your neighborhood or another city, or it's helpful just as you're talking to people in the course of living life and you recognize that it might be helpful to pray for somebody. You think, well, what should I pray for them? Maybe they've revealed something, but this kind of gives you an idea of some categories that everybody has in their life. We all have needs related to these 5 big categories that we could actually pray for people, with them in person, live, or apart from them. And you know, this one's obvious. It's physical health. The acronym is BLESS, but it helps us to remember these things, at least in English. I don't know what you do with it in Hungarian. This one here, livelihood, basically means we all have a need for our work lives, looking for jobs, surviving at jobs. Emotional health, again, obvious. Social health, relationships. How often do people having struggles with relationships in their lives, whether it's family or friends or at work? And then lastly, spiritual health. So that's just a tool. That's all it is. I just wanted to mention it. It's in this last lesson, and we did not cover it. So I'm going to erase this. And now we're going to talk about this idea of looking for people of peace and their oikos, or their affinity group, or their circle of influence, however we want to call it. The thing is, everybody has one, and sometimes more. And for some people, it's quite small. And for some other people, this group of people might be larger. Even isolated people usually have at least 1 or 2 people that they trust or relate to. And what this lesson is encouraging us to do is to keep our eyes open for the group. Keep our eyes open for the group around there's a person, whether it's a real person of peace or similar. What we want to do is we don't want to just focus on that individual. We want to open our eyes to see who that person relates to. It might be really obvious because they're within a family. It might be less obvious, but you have to pay attention to who do they have around them that either they influence those people or maybe those people influence him or her. We're looking for these natural existing groups. They already exist. That's what we want. Everybody has them. Okay? We want to take advantage of that because that's the pattern that we see in the New Testament. We know just by intuition that they exist and that they can be used for good. For instance, even something as simple as if I'm gonna buy a new car or a used car, I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to talk to people that I trust who can give me advice about buying a new car or buying any car, because I don't know that much about cars. So I'm going to talk to Sasha, I'm going to talk to my friend Barkley, do a little research on the internet, but ultimately their opinion, I'm going to talk to Hussein. These are friends. I appreciate the wisdom that they can give. Everybody has that. And it counts also whether we're talking about sports, whether we're talking about politics, or whether we're talking about spiritual things too. For the sake of this lesson, I'm just going to ask us this. Without reading any Bible passages right offhand, again for time, I would say, who can just think of somebody in the Bible, New Testament or Old Testament, that might fit this description of a person of peace? Who? Cornelius is a perfect example. Why? He was very influential, wasn't he? And he welcomed the messenger and the message into his house. He gathered his whole household. It probably includes servants as well as family members, a lot of people. The Roman guard.
Locked Paul into the prison.
Yes, exactly. The Philippian jailer. Yeah. Priscilla and Aquila. As far as we know, they're already believers, but they were certainly influential. They opened their home. Mm-hmm.
So they run a whole church.
They had a whole church in their home. Somebody said Lydia. Lydia is another person in Philippi who, what happened? Paul and Silas go to Philippi. They're out basically looking for people of peace. They go down to the river. They find this Lydia because there's not a synagogue in the city. So they go where people, a place of prayer. They find some women there. And what happens? God opens Lydia's heart. So God does a miracle, kind of opens Lydia's heart to understand what Paul and Silas are talking about. She receives it, takes them home, and what happens? Her and her whole household believe and are baptized. Same with the Philippian jailer, same with Cornelius. Zacchaeus, okay, with Jesus, what happens? Mm-hmm. And what was the result? Today, salvation has come to this household. Hallelujah.
And Timothy's family, his mom, grandma.
So, in what way would you say Titus?
Well, he was an influential person at the region and the people gathered at his home.
Okay. Anyways, the point is we see the pattern repeated. We know that there was those types of people in the New Testament era. We know that there's those types of people here, and they have these other people around them, and we want to open our eyes and not forget about the group, the natural group that's always that's around these people. We want to get the whole group whenever it's possible.
I think it's important that you can't just say that was one person's way of doing it, because you see Peter, Paul, and Jesus.
Yeah.
In all of their ministries, it was the group.
Yeah. Again, I really believe it's a pattern. It's a flexible pattern. It's not the only way that people come to faith. But let me read you this that's in our this lesson number 7 about finding households of peace. I've actually checked this out, and it is true. It's a true thing. It's a true statement. First of all, does anybody care to guess about, in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, about how many, there's about 30 plus cases of conversions taking place in the book of Acts. Okay? Sometimes it's like Lydia and her household, Cornelius and his household. There's other conversion events taking place, okay, in the book of Acts. There's over 30 of them. How many of those would you say are individual conversions versus like group conversions? Group conversions meaning an oikos or some larger group. Anybody care to guess how many are individuals? Ethiopian eunuch is one. Is an individual.
He preached, but he didn't know about baptism.
There's only 3 clear cases of individual conversions in Acts. It's Paul, the Apostle Paul, the Ethiopian eunuch, and a counselor, Sergiopoulos. Those are the only 3 individual conversions. All the other conversions in the book of Acts take place in groups, and there's over 27 of them.
Wow. Yeah, the first one was 3,000 people on the day of Pentecost.
And we're not talking about, and I'm not saying each one of these conversions events in Acts are all like a household or oikos, but they still take place in groups. One place it says, and a large number of priests believed and were baptized. Okay? And other times, like we see massive conversions on the day of Pentecost. We see that happen several other times where a larger number of people, just says a large number of people believed. Okay? And so the point is, the pattern, at least in the book of Acts, is people believing in groups, not only individuals. They're both. It's both. But I think that we have, in the modern church, we focus much more on the individual, and we forget to look for the group. Okay? Because we're so, this Western idea of personal autonomy and individualism is especially influential in the West. I think it is also in Europe. I don't know so much about Hungary, but it causes us to forget that everybody has these natural relationships that we need to look at. Because we want the gospel to enter in, not just to the individual, we want it to enter into their group of friends, family, when possible.
May I have a question that, if really, we have just 3 individual conversions and 20 some, almost over 30, the group ones. And here's my question: that if we meet somebody and he's being converted and being born again, then probably somehow we can know that it really happened.
Yeah.
But if there is a group thing, then because I've seen that because of the flow of the events, because of the whatever, maybe a group of people said yes for something, and later turned out that maybe more than half of those were just under kind of influence. So real things did not happen.
Yeah.
And because you like the genuine, the real things, and then so we are cautious, seeing that okay, they said yes, but that means probably nothing. And how can we filter out, or should we, or do we have to filter out the things, or just we have to let things happen? And because anyway, if somebody just individually being converted later can turn out that that was not so much serious anyway, so this can happen as well.
Right. Because we know from our personal experience what you say is true, Josie. We don't know exactly what happened with these people in the book of Acts, like the rest of Cornelius's household. All we can know is what the text says. They believed and were baptized. We don't know what their discipleship or the rest of their lives look like. But we know from personal experience that some people say yes and they don't know what they're saying yes to. Okay? I want to suggest that that's a very important issue, but part of the answer is going to be in these groups that we're going to try and call Discovery Bible Study groups, okay? Because we're hoping that if anybody says yes, hopefully they're part of a small group, and they're understanding what they're saying yes to. And if they're not, they've still got this, hopefully a mature Christian that has some connection to that group that's seeing this, that understands this, and is working with that potential issue to be sure that the person understands. And that's ultimately all we can do. And how do we test true faith? We test it by seeing faithfulness and doing things that they're learning.
I guess Jesus addresses this. Just one thing, that Jesus addresses this question in the parable of the seed sower. So, I mean, he already foretells that maybe 75 or like 75% will not bring fruit, 50% of it will get the fruit or get the seed, but will not be fruitful, and only the 25% remains. So I guess it's okay.
What I take home from this is what am I looking for or looking at? If there's a person who's responding, and I see them responding, I don't see just that person. That person lives in a system, lives in a network, lives in social relationships, and think in terms of who he or she is connected to, and don't just think about this one person, because it could be the gateway to a whole bunch of relationships, like Zacchaeus was, Cornelius was, and others. So it's how we approach things.
I know in Sarajevo, for example, a lot of the conversion stories, and I think this is probably true in the other cities like Mostar, where Carmelo's at, during and after the war, when people started converting, most of the conversions were happening through oikos relationships. There were closely related groups of friends and family members, and it didn't usually happen overnight, but it happened with the influence from that person that they knew and trusted and liked, and seeing the transformation of their life and sharing what they're learning, and these people became larger groups of believers, and they actually became churches, a lot of them. They formed churches in Mostar and Tuzla and Sarajevo, and that's how they got started, most of them. We didn't understand some of these principles at that time, or they didn't, and I think it might have grown more, but these were basically oikos types relationships.
And the whole thing that happened in Jerjo, it was Annette's long deliverance. In the meantime, her brother, her sister, her brother's fiance, both of their best friends, mom and dad, some of their friends, they started coming to the Lord. And Arpi, the guy who was responsible for all that, was one of the the friends of the dad. So all this whole explosion, this whole growth, was through different oikoses, and it's when I planted my church, or when we had the church in Budapest years ago, it was different oikos. It was students who their roommate, then the brother of the roommate, then the girlfriend of the brother, and then the father, mother. It just started spreading through all these social networks. So everybody's related to people, and it's bigger than just that one person.
Okay, I'm going to explain this process of the Discovery Bible Study, and then we're going to start practicing it. And I'm going to suggest 3 groups, just 3 small groups, that way we can get through them faster, and maybe we can practice it 2 times. Friends, this is the key to the real key to the whole paradigm. It's really, really important, and I want to encourage you strongly that when you go home after this, that you start thinking about and practicing this Discovery Bible Study, this simple inductive Bible study. Some of you already maybe understand it, but practice it. Practice it alone, but mainly practice it with family members or believers, whoever you can, so that you get more and more comfortable with it. Okay? And it's really, in its simplest form, it consists of 7 questions. You don't have to be a Bible expert, a missionary, or a pastor, or an elder to do it. Anybody can facilitate it, because it's mainly asking questions. 2, what are you thankful for? What's causing stress in your life? You can ask this any way you want, you know. And there's the 3rd one is a Bible passage. And for the Bible passage, we're going to say, whoops. What does this teach about God? What teach about people? 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes I change things a little bit. How to obey it or apply it. 6, who needs to hear it? Group application. Okay. Now there's a few variations of these questions. I'm giving you just a very, very simple, basic one so that we can practice it, okay? And you have all of this in the notes that you're going to get. So this is, what are you thankful for? What are you, what's causing you stress or worry in your life today? Then here is, you read a Bible passage that you choose ahead of time, We don't just open it up. We know what we want this person to read because we know where they're at, or the group. And we read it. We do this thing that we've been doing, which is to read it a few times, paraphrase it, let some people paraphrase it, be sure that they can kind of basically understand it. And then we ask, so what is this passage teaching us about God? What does it teach about people?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we have already translated that material into Hungarian, so it's available. We can mail that.
Great, great.
And also it's available in English. So.
And then we want to ask about the passage also, how do we apply it? How can we apply it this week, or obey it? And then the other question we were going to ask of the group or the individual is, do you know anybody who needs to hear this? Or who can you tell it to? Okay? And then sometimes we can ask this, if there's a group, is there a way that we can obey this as a group? A lot of times there may not be, but it's worth asking.
But then with 5 and 6, you have the I will statements too, right?
Yeah. So with here, you're going to, and I've actually seen this working in real live movements, like we got to see one in Africa, and I've been to other ones, but they didn't let us actually go to where they're having live groups of local people meeting. In Africa, in Sierra Leone, they did. And they were just doing it, just like this. They were going with a group, they were asking the questions, and the people were answering the questions, say, I will try to do this. So you ask the question, and you want people to say, I will try to help my mother clean the house this week, whatever. And then, do you know anybody that you can share this with? Do you know anybody who needs to hear this? And in Africa, again, whoever was leading it was a pastor who was leading this group this time. He asked this, and some kids said, I'm going to share it with somebody at school. And the guy said, can you think of anybody in particular that you're going to share it with at school? So he's trying to get him to be specific, because the more specific you are, the more likely you will to do it. And again, and then the group application is the least, again, sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can't. It sort of depends on the group. These are the big ones. And in your notes, I started using some terminology that another model, DMM model uses, which is 3/3 groups. And the reason I did it is because I like the idea. This is basically, there's 3/3 to this process. This is a third. It's kind of like the beginning of the group. And you can think of it, if it's a group of lost people, or especially if it's a group of believers or new believers, or even if you want to change your existing Bible study into a discovery Bible study for the sake of discipleship. This first part is kind of pastoral care. Okay? You're checking in. It's helping people say, hey, not just focusing on what's wrong, but giving thanks as well. What are you grateful for? This is good for lost people as well. What are you grateful for today? Also, what's causing you stress? And this can be, we can pray for these things too. Or we can say, hey, how can we help Jim because he lost his job, and do we know any ways that we can help him this week? Whatever. This is the second part. And this is the part that focuses on God's Word. You know what Bible passage you're going to use, and it might be a few verses, it might be a longer passage. We're going to practice it with a short passage here in a bit. And That's it. What do we learn in this passage about who God is? What does it say about, what do we learn about God? What kind of God's character? What does it teach us about people? Us? And yeah, that's it. That's right there. That's this part. So that's the second part, God's Word. Some people like to, and then this third part here, that's like, now what am I going to do about it this week? Looking forward. How can I live this out in a practical way? Apply it, be obedient. So you got these three parts. 1, 2, 3. Some people use this idea, which I think is also helpful in another model. It's like you're right here assumes that this is like the first meeting. But for the second meeting, the third meeting, all future meetings, you're going to do something at the beginning, which is you're going to start with, in this part here, really includes, how did it go last week? So that's the accountability part of it. How did it go, Doreen, when you said you were going to, clean up around your building because it's a lot of trash out there? And were you able to do that with anybody? And DP, were you able to share what you said you were going to try and share with your coworker? Just kind of like loving accountability. Everybody talks about it. And remember too that the ideal type of group is a group of people who already know each other. It's not a group of people that have no previous relationship with each other. What happens if the group already knows each other and trusts each other and we're doing this? They can share, they're free, they feel open, don't they? They're not afraid to talk openly. But what happens if you got a group of 3 or 4 people together and they don't really know each other?
It's going to be very shallow.
Very shallow. Yeah, you probably see this with students. We see it all the time. It's the usual. Anytime in the past we could get people together to read the Bible. Hey, I'm going to have a Bible study at my house or at the church. I invite friends from different parts of my, that I know, but they don't know each other. When they get together, what happens? Shuti. They say nothing.
Takes a couple of meetings probably to get somewhere.
Yeah. And maybe one person just likes to talk and they talk about everything, but it's a totally different dynamic if it's an oikos or a group of people who already know each other and trust each other versus getting together a group of people who don't have a natural connection. So people will talk usually, and then we just want to teach them to start putting it into practice. And it takes time, but eventually, if God's working in these people, they will. They'll do it. I've seen it happen. It's amazing.
How long does it take to have all oikos in one room?
It just depends, Balu. We know in real life, this is easy to talk about, but in real life, it's not so easy to make happen. All we can do is pray and try. Think about the people, the relationships that we already have. Who do they have around them? Pray for them, and maybe, look for a time when, hey, like Attila, we've been friends for a while. Are you ready to read the Bible with me sometime? And if so, would your wife be willing to do it? That might be how you start. If they have an adult child in the house, like, hey, let's just all do it together. But he might say, yeah, I'd like to do it with you, but I'm not ready to have anybody else in it yet. We work with what we get. But I really believe by faith that we're going to find some groups. We found a few in Bosnia. It takes a long time sometimes, but They're out there. They're out there. Don't give up.
That's why you said it a couple of times with that question, do you have any friends that you think might be interested?
Yeah.
Just keep asking, what are your friends, what about family? Really trying to-
In some ways, I think students are probably a little bit easier. I don't work with students, so I don't know for sure, but students always have people that they hang around with. We've gotten several groups started in the Studentsky Center because somebody's learning English with our missionaries and do this. She goes back and starts reading it with her friends at the dorm at the Studentsky Center. It happens.
From our experience, the I will statements are the hardest part.
It is.
Especially for existing Christians that have been doing Bible study for years.
Yeah.
It's really hard to change that out.
Okay, I'm gonna, yeah, your DP is right. So the only way to really sort this out for yourself is to start practicing doing it, okay? And the best way to start practicing with it is practicing with existing believers or with your family, anything to get practice. Then the questions are gonna come out. You guys are available to answer questions. I'm available. But a lot of the times you can just figure it out yourself. It's not really difficult. Things that happen is, like what DP is just saying, one of the ways that we automatically do this is to start a Discovery Bible study at the church, okay? So you've already got a Bible study going on, and we're going to say, hey, let's turn this into a Discovery Bible study. And so that, and I think that's a really good idea. However, if you're going to do it with existing believers, you have to have realistic expectations, because usually what's going to happen is what DP just said. All of a sudden, they're used to somebody sort of maybe sharing a lesson, sort of a Wednesday night preaching event, or there's a little bit of discussion, but there's no real challenge to obey it or share it, okay? Now we're asking them to obey it or apply it in very specific ways. Most of them just won't do it.
Or they'll come up with this thing like, okay, I will be more kind.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know if you really did that?
Yeah. So that just, you have to be aware and be patient with them, and you really have to help them to be specific. Like, it takes a long time, you guys. But again, I think it's worth it, because in doing that, you're going to find out who in your group, your church, whatever, is open to really becoming activated to do ministry. At the Baptist church where I'm at in Sarajevo, everybody liked the idea, the leaders, the ordinary believers, but when we're trying to do this, nobody would do anything. They would say that they would keep it general, but they were just so conditioned to be passive that they could never get to actually doing anything about it. So I only say that because I say that because if you try to do this, first of all, this whole thing is designed, first and foremost, for reaching lost people. But it can be a really good tool to disciple saved people. But if people have been around for a while, it's really hard to get them to change. So we just got to be realistic about that and remember that, okay? But if you're working with lost people, that's a whole different category. And
And could you write that on there, 0, how did it go? Because that's key.
What?
Start
oh, yes, kind of the,
how did it go? That's so important.
this is all in the notes. You've got this in your notes. How did it go?
That accountability part. Can I share a quick
Yeah,
example?
this is like the very first meeting. All future meetings after this begin with this idea of like, hey, how did it go last week? How's everybody doing? What are you grateful for, Rob? You know, what's stressing you out this week? You know, but it can be really, really relaxed and enjoyable. It actually can be enjoyable. I've seen people truly enjoy this process, so much so that they were spoiled. Don't get me wrong, they were spoiled for going to the church Bible study if they were already a believer. I like Hussein, I taught him how to do this. This is what he enjoys doing. When he goes to the Bible study at the church, he finds it boring because
there's no
two people talk
interaction
and there's no discussion and there's no attempt to actually practically apply it.
Can I just give a quick example?
Just another feeding.
Yeah, exactly. We
So-
tested this in Germany just real quick a couple times where I was just learning about DMM and learning about different forms of T for T and other forms. And so I tested it in our local German church. And it was just that a filter, broken glass? No, you saved it. An opportunity to filter who within the group is really open, because I did prayer lists with people and who's in your oikos. And so the believers of the church actually have a list in front of them. And so let's just start with, and we actually as a church and a denomination even did an MVP list, most valuable people in your community. And then you're supposed to pray for the next 6 weeks for them. But it was a good way to see who's really interested. And there was one woman who came to faith through that and got baptized. But it was a lot of Christians, it was mostly believers. And some of them, just like you said, it was difficult to commit to and then follow up. And am I really going to share with somebody, build a relationship? But one woman then, who I felt was really open and wanted to do more, we then started another group as we tried to multiply it further. But it is a great challenge to start in your local fellowship. Andrash has tried a little bit in his house church. Can people live in this new rhythm? It's hard, like DP was saying, but it's a great way to test it and see who's willing to step further.
That's a beautiful way to think, to characterize it, to use it as a filter with your existing Bible studies or churches to find out who really is open to being like truly activated or equipped to do ministry at a higher level. Okay, I like that a lot. That's the good word.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Magyarul mondom, hogy gyorsabban tudom mondani.
In Hungarian, it's faster.
Hogy amikor hallottam másoktól is erről tanítani,
When I heard this concept or this teaching from others
sztorikat,
and the stories,
így hallgattam őket is, meg hallgattam téged is,
I listened to them, and as I listen to you now,
akkor olyan egyszerűnek, olyan gyorsnak tűnik az egész.
and it looks so easy, so quick.
Már arról beszélünk, hogy már egy olykosz ott a szobánkban, vagy valahol,
We are already talking about an oikos sitting in our room,
de aztán ahogy így mondják így el a történetüket,
but as I see people, as people tell their stories,
azt látom, hogy mit tudom, akitől én több sztorit hallottam.
I see it especially from those whom I heard many stories from,
Hogy mit tudom, egy évig próbálkoztak,
and I saw that like we've been trying it for a year,
mit tudom én, azt mondja, rájött arra, hogyha csak ő van a feleségével, és úgy hív velem hívőket,
and they realize that if it's only him and his wife, and they invite non-believers,
akkor annak nincs ereje, mert legalább négynek kell lenni, legalább valamilyen keresztény közösségben. Ebbe behívjuk a nem hívőket.
it's not powerful because they say that there needs to be at least 4 Christians to whom we can invite other people,
Tehát mert hogy akkor valósul meg a keresztény közösségbe való behívás.
because that's when this is when the Christian community happens. So with 4 people, Christian community happens, and then and we can invite people for this community then.
És akkor de nem is ez a lényeg, hanem az, hogy próbálkoztak úgy, hogy csak ők kérte a feleség.
So then they tried with the 2 of them,
És akkor azt mondja, egy évig nem ment,
and it didn't work out for 1 year.
változtattak,
They changed.
voltak 4-5-en a gyülekezetből.
There were 4 or 5 people in the church,
Abba hívták be
and then they invited people
közösségbe,
into that, and then it worked.
Aztán elmondott még 2 példát,
And then he told another
de
few
hogy
stories.
rájöttek, hogy nem működött.
They told stories through which they realize how it does not work.
És akkor így néztem, ez legalább egy 2,5 év.
And when I calculated, it was at least 2.5 years.
Mhm.
Igen, tehát hogy csak azt akarom mondani, hogy izgalmas, amikor ezt így hallgatjuk, mert elképzeljük, hogy már ott ülünk az emberekkel.
When I say it's what I want to say is that it sounds interesting when you imagine yourself sitting around with these people,
De ez tényleg Istenem múlik meg, nyilván rajtunk is, hogy jól csináljuk.
but it truly depends on God and on us if we do it well.
És nem tudjuk, hogy mennyi időbe telik, csak hogy ne ijedjünk meg attól, hogy lassú esetleg.
We should not be afraid of seeing it slowly taking into action.
Yeah, I totally agree, Balu. We need to be really patient with this. It sounds really simple in theory, but it is simple, but it's not easy, okay? It's simple, but it's not easy. And a lot of times we start with people who aren't the right people, okay? We might get we get groups going, but it doesn't really have a true person of peace, or it turns out that the people who are in the group, maybe lost people, maybe they're really not interested. Maybe they said yes to be polite. In my case, maybe they said yes because they like to hang out with foreigners. But after a couple of meetings, they don't show any more interest. That's okay. We got to keep trying that until we find that real person of peace or fourth soil type of person.
My question is goes back to my previous question that is it not what Jesus says that if you don't find a person of peace, move on, because there will be people who are interested, but with them, but they are not enough. You
Yeah.
need to find a person of peace. If you don't find the specific characteristics of a person of peace, you just move on and find it somewhere else, and maybe you will find a few years later a person of peace in that area, and then you can work through them because you will not be there instead of them to reach their community.
Yes, Balush, I agree with you. When I was first trained in this, they told us, like, if you don't find a person of peace, you just keep going until you do. Just keep going until you do. So what that means, though, and practically speaking, is we found a lot of people who show some interest, and they're willing to read the Bible, but they weren't that serious about it. So our trainer said, shake the dust off, go on. Well, I won't shake the dust off that fast. I'm going to stick with people for longer to be sure, okay? But the point is, at some point, you really have to move on so you can find the person who does have this larger capacity, because when you find him or her, they're going to influence more people for the kingdom of God, and therefore, ultimately, it's better. But sometimes we have to say no to people who maybe we like to spend time with. So, in principle, I agree with you, what you're saying, Balush. It's absolutely true. In practice, it's harder to do than to just talk about it.
But I guess it's a principle that was taught to the pastors, and the pastors are not pastors. And when we get the point, the pastors are not obligated to sit down and nurture all kind of people. They just need to find the key people and move on, and they start the work there locally, I guess.
Yeah. No,
What a question.
I'm uncomfortable with it.
I'm a little uncomfortable with this. I agree, but it depends on the situation. If these are people that you're going to see on a regular
Yeah,
basis, if you're in that neighborhood, You don't want to just say, oh, they're not interested, write them off. In this context, you're going to a specific place on a specific mission to find these key people. But if it's your neighbor, you don't want to quickly reject somebody because, oh, they're not a person of peace. So we need to balance this a little bit because it's not always easy to see who's a person of peace right away. And you don't know what God's going to do in their life.
The point that if there is a person of peace in that area, that's why God is sending you in. So rather my question is it not the point that Jesus is saying, go there, and I will arrange the meeting with the person of peace if there's one. If not, just move on.
Yeah.
It's not your timing. It's not the timing.
If you're going to another area.
Yes, yes.
People can feel that too. People feel that if you're only interested in them, if they are interested in your message, otherwise I don't care about you. You don't want to have that message.
I see it in Jesus' life that he was very often very rude with people that he was not sent to. And I'm not saying that this is what we should do, but he was very focused. Sometimes he was very focus oriented. He just went after what he wanted. And when the Samaritan woman came to him and said, heal my daughter, he said, I'm sorry, it's not my business now.
Yeah, yeah.
Do we consider move on like, okay, so we're not going to exclude you, we're not gonna give you like stop sign or anything else, but you won't waste your time and energy and invest in those kind of people as you would in somebody who will come and be.
I have a story for you.
As you would, yeah.
I would just say that maybe this is told to the apostles who are sent. That's a different. Apostles who are the sent ones.
Mm-hmm.
This is. I don't think that this applies for the pastors. Rather,
Yeah.
it's a question.
Yeah, I think Balu, tell your story, but really we're talking about, as DP said, we're talking about two like really broad categories of looking for people of peace. One of them is being sent out to another place. The other one is where we live our life, and you behave differently in those two contexts, with how we relate to people. Go ahead, Balu, tell that story.
Két embernek a sztoria.
Two people's story.
Tehát van egy csoport,
There is a group,
és a csoportvezető feleségével, ugye, hogy kapcsolatokat létesítsenek, elmennek pilates órára, vagy mit tudom én, ilyen helyekre.
and the group leader and the wife and his wife, in order to make connections, they go to different lessons like pilots lesson and things like that.
És ott az egyik embert ott meghívták egy olyan csoportba.
And one of the ladies were invited by them to their group.
Elment, és onnantól kezdve őt megtért.
And this lady just went there. She got baptized and she converted and got baptized.
Aztán a csoportvezető, egy másik személy,
And the group leader, who is another person,
akiről meghívta a taxisofőrét.
and the group leader invited his taxi driver.
Mindig őt kérte, amikor ment a repülőtérre, vagy különböző helyekre.
He always invited this specific taxi driver when he went to some places,
Mindig tudja mesélni neki az életéről, hogy mi történt.
in order to be able to always talk to him about his life.
És őt is egy ponton meghívta,
And at some point, this taxi driver was also invited,
és elment egyszer-kétszer,
and he went there once, twice.
aztán elmaradt,
Then he stopped going,
akkor csináltak valami mást a csoporttal, oda is elment egyszer.
and they did something else with the group, and the taxi driver went, but he didn't really join the group.
És aztán sok hónap eltelt.
And many months later,
Már nem emlékszem pontosan a sztorira, de csatlakozott a csoporthoz.
I don't remember the story, but they joined the group.
Igen,
God worked in him.
És ott maradt a csoportban,
And the guy remained in the group
és bemerik között.
and got baptized later on.
És aztán kiderült ugye, hogy volt egy idős hölgy, 80 éves hölgy,
And it turned out that there was an elderly lady, an 80 years old elderly lady,
aki a gyülekezetbe mindig ezzel a taxisofőrrel.
who went with this specific taxi driver to the church
Pontosan azért, hogy ő is beszéljen.
in order to talk to him about Jesus.
Fél évig így ment vele a gyülekezetbe.
And for half a year, he was going with this
De
person.
most sosem ment be a gyülekezetbe se.
But the guy never went into a church, into the church.
És aztán a bemerítkezésén megtudott.
But finally, the old lady could be at the baptism of this taxi driver.
Tehát a hölgy nem tudta elhívni a gyülekezetbe, de a csoport elérte őt.
The old lady was not able to reach the taxi driver, but the small group managed.
De csak azt tudom mondani, hogy Isten munkálkodik.
I want to say that God works.
És aztán lehet, hogy valaki elmarad, de aztán vissza tud jönni.
There are some people who maybe leave the group,
És talán ez is jelenti azt, hogy a mezők fehéret az adatát.
and but they would later join in because, but it might mean that the fields are ready for harvest.
Nekünk fogalmunk sincs arról, hogy a körülöttünk lévő emberek mennyire fehérek.
We might have no clue about how why the people around
Nekünk
us,
fogalmunk sincs azt,
how ready they are, because we have no clue how many people have already invested into their lives,
That's right.
És mi csak csináljuk azt, amit Isten mond.
and we just have to do what God
Yeah.
wants us.
That's
De
right.
hogy ez a van is, meg nincs is, és aztán meg ott van a csoport.
Yeah. So you can see that some people come and go, and then finally
Yeah.
they are
Yeah,
actually
we just
there.
don't know. Okay, thank you for that Balu story. That's a good illustration. We need to go ahead and practice doing this at least one time, and I don't think we're just going to practice it one time in small groups of 3. I'm going to give you a really short passage to practice, and then we're going to debrief it a little bit. And again, my advice is going to be, if you think this is a good tool, then practice it when you leave here. Read it, think about it, read more about it, learn how it works, but mostly you have to practice it if you think it's worth it. So we'll do it one time here in small groups, and then we'll get back together and we'll debrief it and try to answer some questions and address concerns about it. So you guys divide yourself up into 3 groups. What do we have? Yeah, whatever feels most natural for you. Maybe so you can do it in your own language. I don't care, however you guys want to do it. And like somebody go back there in the corner, somebody over here, just wherever. And we're going to do, to make it really simple and just get through it, a really simple passage is going to be just a long verse. Luke 18, okay? Luke 18. I'm sorry, Luke 4:18. Luke 4:18. Luke 4:18. Luke 4.
Yes, please look for 18.
Everybody's going to do a Discovery Bible study.
Luke. Okay, so maybe if somebody could join these 2, there's 3.
Yeah.
Here's 3, and we can do an English 3.
Okay. I can work with, if Carmelo's on there, I'll do it with Carmelo. So let's go ahead, and remember, I want you to please just go ahead and go through the group. It's not going to be like supernatural, but we just want to get some experience going through the questions, and don't spend too long because we don't have that much time. Like, what are you thankful for? Think of something that you're thankful for. What's stressing you out? Just say something, read the passage, paraphrase the passage. How can you apply the passage? Who can you share it with? Luke 4:18. So I'll leave these questions up here if you need to look. Probably you wrote them down. Did you say Carmelo's on here? Rob?
Is he coming?
No, I don't see him.
Contact him.
That's all right.
Coming, yeah.
That's all right.
I thought it-
He appears. I'll offer, you guys, I'll offer at some point to come down there if he's interested to Mostar.
I tried to go visit, and he talked about, have you heard he has a couple house groups? I think he said one was a 2-hour drive away that he's trying to encourage and build some discipleship momentum. So
Here's the thing.
some of these.
Here's the thing with Carmelo. I have a really good relationship with him, but we're not that close. He's probably the only pastor, I don't know if I told you this, he might be the only pastor in Bosnia that I haven't actually sat down and talked to about this. But I know he knows about, he's heard from the others, and nobody's positive about it amongst his, it's like either they're neutral to like, it's just the foreigners. So I don't know what his impression is. What I do know is that he respects this guy, and if you guys can use your influence and I can be available,
Right, yeah.
then yeah, I'll do whatever it takes to get him moving. It is a 2.5-hour drive, so you can get there on a train pretty even quicker. So it's not bad. It's doable. And I would definitely go down there for his sake if he's interested in
It was below, I thought it was above. I didn't realize.
south, yeah.
It's southern.
South, yeah. It's,
Okay.
yeah.
That's the famous bridge, right?
Uh-huh.
Oh gosh, his wife went there last summer, I think it was. He sent us pictures.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little place, yeah. Very popular, very touristy in the summertime. Yeah, but he's like the king of, he's like one of the first converts there. A lot of stuff started with him in Mostar and that part of back during the war and after the war, yeah. A lot of the other pastors, some of the other pastors in Bosnia right now were people that converted through him and that he discipled, and he's very, very influential. There's one in Mostar that they started. Some missionaries along with them started it back right after the war.
Which mission organization was most?
Back in those days, the most influential ones was the Bible school. I think it was an Assemblies of God folks, but there was also a bunch of evangelical churches in Georgia around Atlanta who were like EV Free and others that were coming in and doing a lot of work in Mostar, and they were very influential as well. So it was a combination of people from all over the evangelical spectrum, and especially in Mostar.
EV free. It's,
Evangelical Free.
evangelical.
Not sure. You know who Reach Global. Reach Global is EV3, yeah.
I know a couple people in Budapest. Are they down?
They were. The Reach Global people who were in Sarajevo have left, except for the one couple that are here now, Tommy, yeah, they do, I think, member care for Reach Global out of Budapest now.
We've got some
Tommy.
mixed partnerships with them.
Yeah.
Caused some problems. Oh gosh, it's a small denomination.
Really?
This is where we're going.
Yes.
Talking about this scripture, the 4:18. The question is that we have to talk about only the 1.3 and 4, or the rest of the as well.
So, for the passage, we're going to, what does it teach us about God?
That's okay. And
What does it teach about people?
or about us, that's okay. But how about should we work now on the point number
Yes,
5, 6,
everything.
and 7?
Everything, yeah. Yeah. Try to come up with practical or realistic ways that you can actually apply it or share it. And I wouldn't worry about the group application so much, but So Rob, when we finish this, we're just going to debrief it and answer questions because they've got you guys here too. You know, I'd love to have done this twice, like doing it with an Old Testament passage like your lost people. This is just a really simple, clear passage is why I chose it. But we'll debrief it, answer questions, and that's about all we can do for now.
Yeah, if we could just save 10 minutes or so at the end to say we want to have some follow-up, we want to have some content.
Yeah.
Like we said, Yoji and I were just talking before that he's really excited about that. And then we can just, your resource, you're not going to be up here all the time. But if you want to contact Jim.
I can be totally available online. I'll hop on Zoom and talk to people. I'll be a part of,
Give your experience.
You know that I'm, well, they don't know me as well, so they're not going to contact me, but you know, you can activate me to help.
Zoom call and check in with each other.
Yeah.
Sit in and give us some
Yeah.
insight or something
Yeah.
like that.
I still get energized when others are energized by this. I've been around a lot of people who have lost a lot of energy over the years. It's like, okay.
And you hope it brings some. And what's wonderful is like, you know, Yoji, to see him at this age realizing we can start some new things and influence 20-somethings. It's like,
Yeah, this is
so cool.
really, really fun.
Really hopeful.
Really hopeful. Yeah. Got to choose the hope.
Yeah, exactly. So is Sasha going to be with you like on a regular?
Yeah, we see him a lot.
Yeah, okay.
So he's been mostly just kind of like these ideas from his experience, just reading on his own. What's his name? Neil Cole stuff. He's just doing that all on his own. He met our team members and came into our little missionary world, and we're saying, yeah, that's good stuff. Let us show you how we can put that into practice. It's like, here's the principles, we're going to use this paradigm. Every time we try to go through the lessons with him, something happens. So Sasha, yeah, he wants to work more closely. He wants to be activated to be a discipler and meet with people on Jesus Messia or Media to Movement. But we never got him trained. So that's why he's here. And it's like, I'm going to give you a diploma. It's like, and now you're official. It's like, but he's kind of a natural evangelist. And so he will be he will meet with people from contacts from Media to Movement, and he'll help with content creation, just kind of as those Bosnian eyes, and we'll keep working with him, kind of like coaching him and discipling him in these principles. Me and another guy, a couple of other guys that are closer to him. It's getting pretty sizable. In the past 4 or 5 years, as we started praying for God to send us more workers, pioneers. We've got 25 new people in the past 4 or 5 years, and we're praying for it's kind of like always 15 more, Lord, 15 more. It's like a little backstory there, but we just know we've got churches, tiny first generation church. We've got tons to go. We never know where it's going to happen, but everybody's going to be sent out, and they're going to have their own little circles of influence. They're going to influence the whole country. And some of them are going to influence other missionaries. Some are going to influence other believers or, find new believers. So we just don't know. The more people we have, it's like a numbers thing. The more people we go out there, the fire is going to start somewhere, and sowing more seeds, casting vision, training others. If everybody's doing this, then we'll eventually create an atmosphere where a lot of people are thinking like this, and then when God starts raising up the right people, then hopefully we'll have the pieces in place that some kind of little Bosnian-shaped movement can take off.
Yeah, setting the groundwork. That's what we kind of feel like we're doing here today. Is the structure and the committed leaders.
Man, yeah. What I wouldn't give to have 3 or 4 of these guys that you have here in this room. You got 5, 4 of them for sure. We don't know bother. This is his first exposure, right?
But we did the Brazilian.
Oh yeah, the Brazilian,
16,000 people in 20 years, and so he came. Probably went to some Budapest Baptist translated it. That means multiplication. And so long they decided to break the word. So, yeah, he really feels like from January he's going to start, but slowly, step by step, transform his church into cell-based, not just a church with small groups, because they've tried that many times.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
small groups to reach our neighborhood. So, if we come here with Entourage and House Fellowship, Chapter, you usually travel when I saw Brad coming in and out in Budapest. We're thinking right now here in the south to kick some things off at least in these next few months.
Super. That's great. Well, I really feel glad. This is probably the best, most enjoyable training I've done in a really, really long time because of who you have here and your
Although I
positivity.
wish you could have more enjoyable trainings.
I think part of what it was in the past, in the first 5, 6, 7 years, we were training anybody who would be trained, but that included people who were skeptics. And now, after
Feel out before we invited these people.
yeah,
We don't
after
really
10
know
years,
what to say.
after 10 years, I think in a lot of places, mission fields, people have sort of sorted themselves out to those who are like, okay, you know, I understand that this is another way of doing it. I'm not that interested. And you've got the people who are like, yeah, this makes sense, and you can work with them. And the other ones, they're no longer throwing bricks at you because this is like heretical or something like that. And so you can find
Still
out.
gonna run some of those,
Yeah,
but
yeah, you are, but you can still organize trainings of people who really want to learn. And that's what this is, and it's just really wonderful to be a part of it.
that's what we'd love to do if we can get some of these guys to do it in Hungarian. That would be the next step.
Yep,
So,
yep,
I'm really excited. I think I mentioned I talked to Nima Lansi a few weeks ago. He said, I'd love to just come and see Jim. But then, it's not really good time for him to sit through training and
Yeah.
his church, unfortunately. Yeah, you responded right that he's still reading. He talked me through that. He tried to propose, and he sent me in English the 7 questions. He said, well, here's what we're working on with Jim. He said, I can't convince my elders right now to do. What a shame. And he's got the content all in his brain. He wants to run with it. And now he's testing some Reformatisch Reformed Church Be My Disciples thing. But the church was interested. At least it's a step.
Yeah.
He said, I think I'm going to come back to you guys eventually next year.
Good, I hope so.
So, I mean, he's got the seeds.
You know, yeah, Leslie's a very influential guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's
I know he's so connected, yeah. The whole region,
He's
yeah.
been all the way down. He told me a couple of stories about going to San
Yes, he's been down there many times and brought people with him. He seems to have a heart for Bosnia, so does his sister.
His sister, too.
His sister, Andy. And in
She
fact,
actually translated.
she did. No, Andy actually translated the original, an earlier version, which was 10 lessons. I think I sent that to you as a Word document.
So those that are
So
Hungarian, I'm going to follow.
that is absolutely good stuff. This is a later version of the 12 lessons that some would say it's improved on, but those are the basic lessons that we used for like 8 years around the world. Those 10 lessons, just like that. Pioneers, several other organizations were using them, including Frontiers.
I met a guy from Frontiers and M2M. He's been at this
So,
for a while.
yeah, some would say this is new and improved. It's not where it's improved, but it's basically the same principle. The core principles are in there, translated into Hungarian. So if you trust Andy's translation, it's good.
What about you? Gives a hand and follow in particular, and let them read through it in Hungarian.
Yeah.
And see.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that in this gathering. So,
Good. So just I'm glad that you remembered that you got those.
yeah, thanks. That's great.
Mhm. Wow.
See how we did with the app.
Okay, let's go ahead and get back together, and we'll just debrief and answer a few questions. Okay, so how was that? I mean, I know it was really fast and it was kind of fakey, but how was it? It's incredible. Feel like being baptized again or something? What are some challenge? What are some questions that just come up out of doing that? Maybe. What are some questions that come up that you have having gone through the process right now?
In our group, it was mostly about how are we applying this right now at the moment.
Okay.
Not because we just decided what to do, but we already had some plans and we just shared that with one another. And then usually gave us some very wise advice. I mean, he gave it to me.
So we got to remember something about this. Right now, I assume that you're all doing this in a natural way as friends and as mature Christians, right? But if you're doing this, helping lost people to do this, it's a totally different dynamic. So we got to remember that.
You know, that was a point 3 when what does this text says about God, and the point was, you know, that Jesus quoted this passage from Isaiah and saying that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and then, you know, and then I said, okay, so this talks about God who is a God who has a good will over the people, you know, just try to deliver them, heal them, give them freedom, and that talks about God, that God is a good one, actually, and He wants us to experience His goodness, so therefore He sends us out. So God is good. That's the point.
Yeah.
He wants He wants to give His favor, the goodness, and all that deliverance. Yeah, we.
I want to say something about this whole process. That imagine that we found these lost people who are really open, okay, whether it's a person of peace or a bridge person, a student, or an older woman, it doesn't matter. Just imagine. He or she is eager to learn. We know some of them. They're out there. He or she has some influence with a few other people around them. And we're starting to do this with him or her, okay? Just think about this as a effective way for this person to learn about God. They are reading, first of all, they're in this safe group, somehow facilitated in some way by a Christian who's watching out for things, okay? and you're getting to this Bible passage, and you're reading a passage that's already been pre-selected, okay? You're reading it possibly 2 or 3 times carefully. These lost people are reading it and they're listening to the Word of God, this passage, 2 or 3 times. Then they're paraphrasing it 2 or 3 times, the same group. So already they have they know more about this passage than possibly a lot of Christians. This is pretty intense. Then, not only that, now they're asking these questions about the passage. What do we learn about God in this passage? What do we learn about who we are in this passage? You can also add a question like, is there something else in this passage that we missed? Or what else is being taught here? You can do that. So you be sure that you get the teaching that's in the passage into there. And then they're talking about, what can I do about it? This is pretty intense stuff for a lost person, but it's pretty simple. And I've seen them just really enjoy the whole process. So my point is, this is really intense, deep, easy to do Bible exposure for a lost person to really start learning a lot about God in a pretty simple, quick way that they can start reproducing the process potentially with somebody else, as opposed to the usual discipleship process that it's just different. So I want to just remind us how potentially powerful this is if we find the right people to do it with. Any other questions about the process? Concerns?
In our group, we almost forgot to share at the beginning. That was the highlight.
That was the highlight, to hear what's going on, what we're thankful for, and what's causing us stress right now. And then we were able to pray for each other, get that out of the way, because we just jumped right into the text and thought, well, we better go back up a little bit.
That's why
I haven't gotten enough sleep lately, and I was so curious about the Luke 4 because I love that passage. I just really love the passage that I said, okay, let's get out. And DP, after we went through the passage, well, we skipped over a couple of things, and that was really what was the icebreaker. Was
Thank you for reminding us that. I really want to emphasize this, everybody. Please don't skip questions. Please don't skip questions. It's designed for lost people to get to know who God is, to go from not knowing God to loving God. And it's useful as a filter, and it's useful for saved people if they really want to grow and become actively obedient. Okay? But if you start removing some of the questions, you're going to mess up the process. And we haven't said this, but in your notes, each one of those questions has DNA embedded in it, okay? They're there for a reason. If you remove one of the questions, you potentially remove the DNA of a potentially healthy Bible group or a potential simple church, healthy group, whatever you want to call it. So let's just go through that really quick while we have time. Yes, Sasha.
I have only one concern because in my experience, I've always saw that there is a person who facilitates Bible study, however this looks like. And probably my biggest concern would be that these unbelieving people would probably point more views in you, like expecting you to explain to them what does this mean. And yeah, I just don't see that happening if we really want to include them. So, yeah.
Okay.
How do we, I don't know, how do we encourage them? Like, for example, I've tried this before, so I'm not going to lie, and I would tell people, I don't know, why don't you tell me what it means? Why don't you read another time? I don't want to be imposed as a leader, which, I mean, obviously somebody facilitates, but I don't want to be a person who has all the answers, all the right theology, or all the right doctrine or curriculum, and this is what you're supposed to read
Yeah.
from this.
Thank you for mentioning that, Sasha, because it's really, Sasha brings up a really important point. Number one being that please don't teach. Don't become the teacher. Well, it's hard for believers, but it's hard for us who are teachers and pastors and missionaries. It's kind of like feel like it's our job. But here's the thing, please don't teach in the sense of feeling like you have to explain everything to everybody, okay? Let God do the teaching, let the text do the teaching. You help be sure that the right questions get answered. If somebody gives the wrong answer, there's ways of dealing with that. Where do you see that in the text? Okay? Or, hey, that's a really good question, but we're not going to deal with that right now. We're just going to talk about this particular text, okay? And to answer Sasha's concern, I would say if people aren't cooperating with the process and they refuse to talk, or they just want to talk about other things and not engage with the text, I would say you're probably working with the wrong people, okay? And maybe they're not the people that you need to continue to do a DBS with.
Along with this, it can be difficult if you start a group with some that are Christians and some that are non-believers, because the Christians want to answer and teach. Naturally, they've got so many things to share, and
remember what our
They
idea.
need to be trained.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. They need to be trained, and if they're teachable.
Yeah, they're teachable.
If they're teachable and trainable, that's what we want to do. But some people aren't, and we just have to kind of like leave them. But remember, what is our ideal group? We're not always going to get the ideal group, but what is the ideal group? It's an oikos. It's an existing group of people that already hang out together. Okay? And we're doing this with them because they basically said, yes, I want to read the Bible with you, or I'm willing to. Okay? And they already know each other. So the ideal group is a group of people know each other and they're open. Along the way, we're going to run into people and groups that are not ideal and that doesn't work with, but sometimes we won't know it until we get into it with them.
But here's my question or problem, because I try to facilitate some groups, and I almost always were faced with certain challenges because some people in the group were not cooperative at all. So but this is not my oikos. This is somebody else. Somehow because of this is his net or her network. But if somebody from that oikos or that group of people is not cooperative, and I see that's a kind of just break, it slows down the process, just kills the meeting or whatever. So what can I do, because this person does not belong to my network? Mm-hmm. I somehow get joined to that one, but this is somebody else. So can I somehow help him to get out of the group, or just or kick him or her out, or so what is the solution? Because that's not mine, and if I lose that one, might lose some others, or even the leader. So what can I do?
I think that's a very real life question. I don't know the answer to it, Yoji, but I think through some people getting together and praying and looking at potential solutions to that, you'll find an answer. I really, really do. I don't think there's anything that we deal with that we can't discover the answer to together, or in your church or whatever, by praying and talking about it. I think you'll find out God will give us the wisdom to deal with each one of these things. That's not a cop-out answer. That I really believe that. So now let me address this DNA of the questions, okay? And you do have in the back of lessons that you're going to get, there's some resources, and one of the resources has all of the questions along with the DNA of each question. So like the DNA of like a healthy spiritual community. People who, like the first question is, the first set of questions is kind of like this pastoral accountability type of thing. We're talking about things that are bothering us so we can pray for each other. We're caring for each other. We're talking about what we're grateful for, which is also turns into a form of worship if they become believers. If they are believers, it's just Thanksgiving is a form of worshiping God, expressing that, okay? You get to the second part of this process with the Word of God, and right away you're teaching the DNA that the Bible is the center of everything. The Bible is the main focus of our knowledge and our understanding about God and about the world and about people. So that's that DNA that gets that. If it's not here and people start talking about something else, so we want to bring it back to here. So they're learning that. They're learning about who God is through this, who is Jesus, what's it teach about God, what's it teach about Jesus, finding out who we are through the same thing because the Bible, God is teaching it. Then this question about what are you going to do about it, it's teaching, it's the DNA of simple, basic obedience to the Word of God. This is really important, DNA. Don't give in to the temptation to remove that question if people have trouble answering it. Please don't. Find another way to ask the question or so that people understand it, or just gently encourage them and model it, especially if you're doing it in your church, with believers. Don't give up. Persevere with that. The other question is also one that we're tempted to not use, but this idea of like, who could you share this with? Or who else do you know who might need to hear this story? What's the DNA in that? It's evangelism. It's basic evangelism. Only you never have to use the word evangelism. You never have to take them on a seminar for evangelism. They're learning it from the beginning, how to simply, naturally talk about what they're learning with their friends and their family, which is what evangelism is. And they might even be doing it now as unbelievers in the beginning. So that's the basic DNA. The DNA of that last question, is there something we can obey here together? Can be kind of like, just doing things in community, serving our community in some way as a group of believers or whatever. So there's DNA in all of those questions, and if you remove some of the DNA, you potentially cripple the future group. Okay. Any other questions or concerns? Thoughts? Final thoughts? I mean, we're finishing up here at 1 o'clock.
You've got those two words, discovery pyramid, right there. Would you just I think I know what that's talking about. Would you discuss that?
I was, and then I decided not to because, well, here's what I was thinking. There's this. I don't have the drawing with me, you guys, but there's another big temptation in this. And since I don't have it, I can send it to one of you guys. And the idea is this: if you have information like teaching, like this, new stuff, there's a temptation to, like, hey, I understand this. I'm trying to remember how this pyramid works. I can't do it properly, so I'm just going to explain it. Do you know it?
If it's the one about how much we learn, the percentage of what we learn.
Oh, yeah, there's that. Okay, so there's two pyramids. There's one. This is basically called a learning pyramid. And it's really, I think it's valuable. There's been some research done that most learning and teaching is done in a one-way communication sort of way, like like lecture, okay, preaching, and the research shows that retention of the information after 48 hours of this kind of, if that's the only kind of teaching, is like less than 10%.
If someone is, if I'm teaching or preaching, in 48 hours, you only remember.
Yeah, you only remember less than 10% of it. It's like it's around 5% after 48 hours. But if you add to it other things like if you write it down, if you make notes, this goes up to like 15%. If there's something visual, like a video or pictures, you know, it's 20%. But then when you add other things into it, like putting it into practice, like doing it, then it goes up to like 50%. You know, do it. And then if you add to that, teach it to somebody else, the retention goes up to like 90%, which is basically what we're talking about in this discovery process. We're bringing a lot more ways of learning and remembering and doing into the whole learning process. But the problem is most of our learning institutions, whether it's schools, colleges, universities, but even our churches, tend to do this like about 90% or more of the teaching, and it's the least effective way to teach.
Well, it's this professor in there's an older one that's been around a long time. There's a professor in South Africa who's done, Dr. Sousa, who's done some new research, and there's one little gap in there. I think you said pictures, it goes up to 20%. Do it but there's one in between. If you talk about it, if there's a if there's a discussion, it's like 60%. So it's much more if you're discussing it in a group, people are answering questions, discovering it. If they can do it, then it's much higher. But then if they have to express it and show it to someone else, then it's up like to 90%. So the thing in this is discussing it with each other is much more effective than just them hearing. But the more they can actually start doing it and then giving it over, then they've really got it.
And I can send that. I have that. I brought it with me. I just left it in the room because I didn't think we would use it. But it's just, it kind of, all it does is reinforce the idea that a discovery Bible study format is a much more powerful tool for teaching and learning than just a lecture, which is okay too, because Jesus lectured. We're not saying we shouldn't preach and like that. We're just saying we need to do less of that and more maybe of this. That was it. I had another, this here, just a FYI, for those of you who love technology, just go ahead and Google that. You can get this in the Google App Store or the Apple App Store. And it is it's a relatively new, less than a year old Discovery Bible Study app. And it's very, very robust. Did you find it? You already had it? It's really good. It gives all the questions. It's all in English. They're adding languages, but that's a process. For now, it's in English, but it's good reinforcement and practice for this whole Discovery Bible Study process, and they've done it wonderfully. It's the best, to me, it's the best DBS app I've ever seen.
I've got one too that we could send around to everyone. Maybe you've seen the from Josiah Venture called the Seek app.
No, I haven't seen that one.
They have it in 11 languages, so there's a Hungarian version too.
Whoa, that's good.
We've heard some.
I've always, in the past 10 years, I've really enjoyed looking at the way different people do the Discovery Bible Study process and the way they ask the questions. I always learn something about how to do it a little bit better.
So there's all kind of models here. As Jim said, there's different models, different ways of approaching it. I want to really encourage you to try some of these for the following reason. From the early 90s on, one of the major things that we did was try to get churches become cell group churches, and to get fellowship, multiplying cell group churches going on. But we always had a problem. People would not volunteer to be leaders. Why did they not want to become leaders? They said, I can't teach. If they have this model, they don't have to teach. And there's several ways that Jim said it early in the beginning. There's many ways to ask this question. Okay, the question, the first question, what made you happier this week? Or what was the first question in the model? What do you think? How many different ways can you say that? How else can you say that? What made you smile this week? What made you happy this week? It's getting to the same thing, so that sometimes people don't want to do that because it feels, what's the word, schablonos? It feels too, same question all the time, but there's different ways you can ask that question. But I really, and then the what does it say about God? What does it say about people? Others will say, okay, what does it say? What does it mean? What's it calling us to do? And what am I going to do about it? They're all the same kinds of things, but it's all of them are the 3/3 that he was talking about. But just find a model that works for you and try this, because anybody can lead a group with these questions. And as he said, some of them are afraid. Okay, what if they ask this? What if I ask that? Really important to teach this. Where do we see that in this passage? Oh, it's not, okay, we can talk about it another time. Today, let's stick with this passage. And then it helps them steer that one away from that one problem. This model really works. And seriously, I've seen a video of an 8-year-old child in South Africa who is leading people to Christ by getting friends together and doing this model. So I really then this is the key to the whole thing, because, okay, if this will be into the next lesson, but this is something I'd like to touch on now. All right, let's say you have 3 or 4 people, and one of them is really learning a lot, and he says, okay, can I invite my friend? What's your answer? If you already have a group, you have a group of 4 or 5, and he says, can I invite my friend? What's your answer?
Let's go, you and I.
You teach.
What's that? Not to this group. See if he has some other friends, and you guys start a group. And the little groups start multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. This is a real good way to multiply these groups. Is there anything?
I would just say that, what he said is good, and just we didn't have a chance to talk about some of the other things that are going on in our part of Europe. But this has been going on in Czech for a number of years. They were some of the first ones who started using discovery approach in their churches, and there's quite a few groups that have started with young people as well as other older people in the churches, and new groups outside of existing churches in Czech Republic. They've been doing it for about 10 years, quite a bit, probably more than any place else in Europe that I'm aware of. That are with local people. I'm not talking about refugees. That's sort of a special category. Okay. So there's that. Yeah. I don't have anything else. I would just except to say thank you guys for receiving me, and I've really enjoyed your enthusiasm and your openness to all of this. It makes facilitating this much more enjoyable than because I've done it a lot of times with people who are really just they just are very disagreeable about it.
Well, Jim, some of us have been thinking and dreaming about this for a while, and we couldn't have done this this group wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you.
No.
Being willing to come and do this with us and for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally, really, I want to say thank you. God has blessed us through you, and through you being willing to drive all the way up here and bring Sasha too, because he was a integral part of this time. I think not only have we learned a lot that we can use, and there's still more. If you see what he sent, there's some more lessons, so we would like to have a continuation at some point, but we wanted to get this far this time. But Jim, thank you. Let's do this, okay? Thank you. Because you had to leave your wife behind and come up here, and so thank you for your sacrifice and for putting all this stuff together, thinking through it, taking us through it, being patient with us as we're doing it. And you've already admitted several times you're an introvert, so you put that aside to come be with us, and so thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for those nice words, and I've enjoyed the beginning of some what it feels like are friendships with some of you all, and hope to see you. I hope to see you again, Lord willing. Truly.
And just briefly in closing, we do want to be in contact and in touch with each of you as much as you want to be in contact with us. There's a number of different projects and things happening here in Szeged, but we know in many other places, in corners of Hungary and beyond, down across the border. So we'd love to look into and ask you about following up. If you're willing to some level of accountability, that you say, hey, I'm going to test this, whatever concept, or start something new and you want to share, we can pray for you. Love to visit too if COVID doesn't prevent. So, and we'd love to link in Jim and others in other areas where we can to learn with each other.
Yes.
And receive more input and resources. So this material is actually in Hungarian as well, an older version. So I'd like to ask those of you that are willing or interested to read the Hungarian version. I don't know how many, 7, 8 years ago, a guy named Németh Laci, which I think many of you know, he lived in Szeged, he also lived in Vukovar. He's traveled throughout the Balkans. He leads a church in Budapest, Délpest közösség, in the Golgotha hálózat. So anyhow, he's happy to release the material. We have the material already, but love to explore it with you.
His sister, Andy, she's the one who translated it. Andy.
And Jim, I would like to ask one more thing from you.
Ask away.
Would you bless all of us and pray for us as we start?
Oh, yes, I would love to do that. Yes.
Let's stand.
Heavenly Father, I do ask in the name of Jesus that I would speak a blessing over this group of men and women here, that you would bless them as they have these good intentions to make disciples who make disciples, start groups that start more groups, and show them how to do this, Lord. I just bless their good intentions, and I bless every effort that they have to do good in your name, and that you will multiply that for your glory. Amen. Thank you.